I woke up due to the eerie silence that filled the space. The sun hadn't quite risen, but there was a faint light coming through the curtains in my room. Something seemed off, like a strange note in an old song. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the lingering effects of sleep from my mind, and looked around the room. My senses gradually sharpened, and a strange emptiness began to gnaw at me. I got out of bed and opened my eyes because my room felt too still and quiet. None of the usual morning noises made by my family, such as laughing echoing through the hallways or pots clanging in the kitchen, could be heard. I had the impression that my previous way of life had suddenly disappeared. I stretched my legs over the side of the bed and slid onto the cool floor. When I yelled from my parents and younger sister, their names hung in the air without a response, sending a chill down my spine. Anxiety and fear started to rise in my chest as my heart was racing. With each empty room, my sense of dread grew as I hurried through the house. The living room was vacant. The kitchen was deserted. There was nobody in my sister's room, and the parental bedroom had been abandoned. As though a cruel magic trick had been performed, my family had mysteriously vanished. Nothing made sense, and my mind raced, trying to think of an explanation as my heart raced frantically. I reached for my phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands, almost dropping it. I spoke with shaking hands and a trembling voice about going to bed at home with my family and waking up to an empty house. I tried to explain the situation as best I could. The dispatcher assured me that officers would show up right away to start an investigation. My mind was racing with anxiety and confusion as I paced back and forth in the living room. The minutes seemed to drag on for hours as I waited for the arrival of the police. The final knock on the door nearly made me jump out of my skin. I hurried to the door and swung it open, glad to see an officer standing there in uniform. The officer, a middle-aged man with a stern but comforting demeanor, listened carefully as I described my morning. He glanced over at his partner, his eyes showing a sympathetic look. They assured me that they would start looking for my family and that I should stay put in case they turned around. The home and its surroundings were thoroughly searched by the police over several hours, but my family was nowhere to be found. There was nothing to indicate a struggle or a forced entry, just a deserted house that seemed to be mocking my growing desperation. The officers walked back toward me, exchanging worried looks as their radios chirped updates that offered no resolution. As dusk fell, long shadows danced across the walls. The officers told me to go to bed and reassured me that they would continue to search all night. I paused, torn between the weariness pulling at my eyelids and the lingering dread keeping its grip on my thoughts. As I lay in bed, my mind was buzzing with scenarios and questions. My resolve was being weakened by the uncertainty. I closed my eyes and forced myself into a restless sleep, wondering what had happened to my family. Were they gone voluntarily, or were they being held captive? I was just about to fall asleep when my phone's piercing ring interrupted the silence. As I jerked awake, my heart was pounding, and I reached for my phone on the nightstand. I held off answering until I saw a phone number on the screen. As I responded, I was simultaneously filled with hope and dread. I said, "Hello?" barely audible, because my voice was shaking. A deep, distorted voice on the other end chilled me to the bone. "Right. You're curious about their location." I clung to the phone as my eyes began to well up with tears and my voice began to tremble. "What have you done to my family? And who are you?" The laugher's voice seemed to echo with evil, and the sound was humorous. On the outskirts of the city, they're at the old Oak Ridge residence. But, young person, be careful. The information you seek might be too much for you to handle. The line abruptly cut off before I could respond, leaving me in the complete dark with my racing thoughts and a growing sense of impending doom. When I heard the phrase Oak Ridge House, I had a vague memory of a place that had been the subject of whispered discussions and was thought to be the repository of sinister secrets that were best kept a secret. Fear clung to me like a second skin as I deliberated my next course of action. My desire to locate my family and discover the truth propelled me forward into the shadows of the unknown, even though I knew in my heart that whatever lay ahead would be terrible. The night air was thick with an unsettling stillness, so I turned toward the old Oak Ridge residence. The moon illuminated the path in front of me as the shadows grew longer with each step I took. I kept hearing the caller's cryptic warnings in my head, but I felt pressured to continue because of the time limit. The chirping of crickets and the rustling of the leaves in the breeze accompanied each step, giving the journey the appearance of an unreal dream. The air was tight and heaving with the tension of the horrors that awaited me. The path seemed to go on forever, and I was uneasy. As I got closer to the outline of the Oak Ridge house, my heart beat quickly as my excitement and fear grew. The once grand structure stood as a dilapidated memorial to the past, with its windows broken and its walls weathered by time and neglect. Ivy, like a silent timekeeper, clung to the collapsing bricks. I took my time moving as I sucked down the lump in my throat. Moonlight entered through broken windows, leaving strange patterns on the ground. The sound of creaking floorboards echoed through the corridors of my mind like a frightful drumbeat. The musty smell of decay hit me in the face as soon as I walked inside the house. My breath caught as I battled to stay in control of the fear that threatened to render me helpless. The atmosphere was thick with dread, and it appeared as though the walls were holding memories that were too ominous to be forgotten. With their fleeting shadows that appeared to reveal the past's kept secrets, dust particles danced in the moonlight. The dim light revealed a trail of dried, crimson stains on the ground. My mind started making associations as I walked further down the trail, and I felt my sense of dread grow. I felt depressed. The hallway led me to a room that was completely dark and whose door was slightly ajar, as if to invite me to confront the truth that was there. I shook as I pushed open the door, revealing a scene that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. My family had passed away on the ground, their faces immobile in an unending scene of terror. The air was still being held by my father's fingers, and his lifeless eyes were fixed on nothing in particular. My mother's dead body stood as a silent witness to a terrible event that I couldn't fathom. My sister's lifeless gaze broke the last of my remaining resolve. She accused me of failing to protect them and of not solving the mystery quickly, and her soulless eyes seemed to pierce through my soul as she said this. Guilt and grief were two of the many emotions I was battling at the time. I cried and fell back, hitting my head against the wall. The weight of the truth was so great that it broke my spirit, and it weighed heavily on me. This reality caught me off guard, and the caller had been accurate. The darkness I was unable to understand or escape had taken my family from me, snuffing out their lives. Time seemed to stop as I knelt there, and the space transformed into a silent mausoleum of dashed dreams and extinguished lives. I felt as though I was caught in a never-ending loop and was unable to advance or retreat. The only sounds I could make out of the oppressive silence were the echoes of my own labored breathing. A cold resolve eventually started to rise within me. I had to face this darkness or risk losing everything. Their death couldn't have been in vain, could it? The morning sun was starting to peek through the broken windows, so despite my trembling legs, I forced myself to stand up. I gave my family's dead bodies one last, longing glance before turning away from the room with a heart heavy with grief and resolve. I couldn't let the truth consume me, no matter how intolerable it was. To prevent the evil from robbing me of everything, I needed to discover the truth. I had only just started my journey when I left the Oak Ridge home and went into the dawn's twilight. Despite the caller's enigmatic warning that the truth might be too much for me to handle, I was no longer willing to continue living in the darkness of ignorance. My family would receive justice if I could only discover the truth, confront evil, and triumph. No matter how terrifying it might be, I was determined to tell the truth, even though I knew the path out of the abandoned house would be hazardous and paved with despair.